I think you've suggested that this whole SNC-Lavalin scandal, if you will, is Hollywood couldn't have written a better script.
Or a more convoluted one. Nobody seems to be in charge over there. They seem to be making decisions, as I say, daily on what their message is going to be. And it doesn't seem like a couple of days doesn't go by before somebody resigns.
Now, when you say over there, is that specifically the Prime Minister's office?
Yes, I mean, I think a lot of Liberal MPs and staffers are wondering what's the message. I think a few of them have been caught offside, maybe had been giving some talking points which didn't play out so well, for example. So there's been a lot of very confused messaging, and of course, this isn't a story about messaging. When you don't have a good story to tell, one suspects, that's when you have 9 different stories.
How do you interpret, most recently we've seen Jody Wilson-Raybould have these cabinet discussions or take part in a cabinet meeting? I mean, are these secret meetings? Are these typical cabinet meetings? She's resigned.
Yeah,
and now she'll be called as a witness.
It's unusual, to say the least, for somebody who's left cabinet to then attend a cabinet meeting of the cabinet she's just left. It's also unusual for a cabinet minister to resign and the first thing she does is lawyer up. You know, hires a former Supreme Court justice to advise her on what she can say and what she can't say. It's also unusual for a cabinet minister to resign and not tell everybody exactly why she's resigning. But there's a lot of unusual circumstances in this case.
Translation, a deal has been made?
I don't think anybody knows, and I frankly doubt it, but who knows? By all accounts, from people who know her well, she's a highly principled person. I think if one is sort of reading the tea leaves of how people are positioning, it seems more than likely that she was the source of these allegations, anonymous allegations as they were when they were printed, that somebody had pressured her to basically go easy on SNC-Lavalin. So it would be unlikely if you were moved to resign your cabinet seat over that. It's hard to see how you then come back into cabinet on any kind of deal, but you know, we shall see. But what I think everyone wants is to hear her side of the story. We've been getting selective versions of it, line by line, from the Prime Minister on days that it suits him. But we're obviously not going to get anything close to an understanding of the story until we hear from her.
A recent resignation also by the Prime Minister's top aide, Gerald Butts. How do you interpret that? Is that a pivot? Don't look there, there's nothing going on there. Is that a pivot away from the Prime Minister?
Again, it's hard to know. It's, again, very unusual for somebody to resign and say, but I have no reason to resign because I didn't do anything wrong. If you're trying to sort of work back the logic of this, you're not going to lose somebody of that stature in the government. I mean, this is a very unusually central person in any government and unusually close to the Prime Minister. So he wouldn't be going unless they anticipated some rather bad news to come. And if you look at the kinds of things he said in his resignation letter, where he talked about defending his reputation, he talked about people who had accused him of being the person who had pressured her, when I actually haven't seen his name being used specifically. And when he talks about his relationship with Jody Wilson-Raybould, the former Attorney General, as having been close and supportive, you put all that together, it sounds like they're anticipating that she would say something about him having pressured her. I don't know that for a fact, but just surmising from that. And that is, I guess, the sort of thing that they didn't think they could survive in public relations terms. He denies it, of course, and nobody can say for sure. But it obviously wouldn't look good on the government, and that must have been part of the calculation. If the idea is that, oh, he'll fall on the grenade and he'll take the attention and the pressure off the Prime Minister, that doesn't usually happen in these situations. That people would know that he would have been acting, if not with the Prime Minister's prior say-so, certainly would have known about it. And all you do in that situation is people just say, well, what did the Prime Minister know about this? You know, the famous question, what did the President know, when did he know it? So the willingness of underlings to sacrifice themselves might be noble in a certain sort of way, but it doesn't necessarily do the trick that it is supposed to do.
We're in an election year, and we have seen the parties, I guess, formulating the framework of their platforms. Then this, what happens now? Can the Liberal government survive this?
Well, the answer is I don't know. They have made it many times worse, as is often the case in these situations, than they might have been for themselves, but I think the fundamental facts of the case are very serious. In my opinion, others have different opinions, but to be on the sly, on the quiet, pressuring or talking to attorneys general to get them to go easy on a company that had a long history of corruption, that had given hundreds of thousands of dollars to the Liberal Party. All of that smells, and we need to have a look at this. And as long as we're doing that, it's not going to be good for the party in power. This is, if I'm right that this is going to run and cause them real difficulty in the election campaign, this will be the third government in a row to be basically consumed by a scandal. We had the Duffy Wright business under Harper, and we had the sponsorship scandal under the previous Liberal government. And a lot of that comes from we've got too much power concentrated in the center, and power corrupts.
I'm wondering how important this will be to Canadian voters in 8 months. Or do Canadians look at this and chalk it up to all politicians are corrupt?
The evidence I've seen so far in the polling, in its early days, is not good for them. That in fact people have not been saying, oh, everybody does. They've actually been saying this looks pretty bad. You know, when you've got a big wealthy corporation that is seen to be getting away with something, I mean, it's not as simple as that, but I think that may well be the way that the public looks at it, then that's not going to play well, except in Quebec. And in Quebec, where SNC-Lavalin is viewed as being a sort of national champion, as a point of pride, as a company that was built by Francophone Quebecers over the decades, people are much more inclined to listen to the message that say, why should they have to suffer for the sins of previous executives, because those people are all gone, and think of all the jobs that we've lost, et cetera. So those arguments have more sway in Quebec. Outside Quebec, people, I think, look at this and go, this is a dirty deal.
Your take on political interference. I mean, we've heard now the comparisons to the Vice Admiral Mark Norman case, to the Boushey verdict, and now this.
Well, there are rules and conventions, first of all, that people are supposed to observe, and across a whole range of fronts in Canadian politics, they've been eroding. People have decided, well, we don't have to obey those conventions, and one of them was that you're not supposed to meddle with the Attorney General. The Attorney General is supposed to make decisions to the extent that she's making decisions about prosecutions without interference or pressure from, certainly from her boss, the Prime Minister. She can, if she chooses, canvass advice from her fellow cabinet ministers, but she's not supposed to have people leaning on her, do this or do that. Secondly, this whole thing about the deferred prosecutions, this escape hatch for SNC-Lavalin, was only brought in the last little while by the government in response to aggressive lobbying from SNC-Lavalin. And it's not clear, even so, having looked at the law, that SNC-Lavalin would be eligible for it. There's all kinds of conditions you have to meet. It's not a pure get-out-of-jail-free card. You're supposed to meet a bunch of conditions, and they haven't. And so the Director of Prosecutions who refused to give her that out may well have made the right decision, may well have made the only decision she could make in law. So what would there be to pressure the Auditor General to pressure her to do? I should say the Attorney General to pressure her to do. The whole thing is sort of outside of bounds. And so you've got both the conventions of non-interference, but you've also got just the letter of the law.